September 1919, for he had felt it before. When Thomas has joined the medical corps and done his war work, he hadn't noticed Milo's absence. But since Ernest had died, he had missed her deeply. Why, he could never fathom for sure. But she never judged him, even now, on the cusp of adulthood. He was her friend, and she his. But he had to be clever. This James Chadwick may have spotted what he had spotted, a chance to make money. He neither knew of nor cared about the man, and only recognized his name as Ernest had sometimes mentioned him. Milo had accepted the offer of writing to him and, as she had shared information others may not have so candidly with Thomas, she might well have shared them with James Chadwick too. If he was enabling her to secure money due to Ernest, and knew the money would be lost to her, Harold Ashby being so obviously ill now, might he have an eye on financial security just as Thomas did? The man irked Thomas. Hadn't he been there for Milo, even in the earliest of days, defending her? Surely he had the right, if anyone did, to secure the Ashby money by marriage. But then as Ernest said, Milo had been a very convenient cover story. And he would have to tell her, wouldn't he? So Thomas did as Milo asked, looking over letters that she had found belonging to Ernest. One was from Professor Rutherford from the first time Ernest was at Cambridge as an undergraduate. Something about a particle of matter, about the densest part of an atom, which Rutherford had discovered in an experiment, and had called the dense part, the nucleus. None of this made any sense to Thomas, but Milo obviously thought it did, for she had underlined various sections of it, including one big section about this atomic particle, with the word "check" written in big letters and underlined twice in her handwriting. "Father can use some of it," Milo told Thomas, a week later, to admit to her he could not help her. He had asked her what use it was. "Really? Father can use it?" "I took a journey to Manchester," Milo continued. "Alone?" "Yes," she replied. "On the train, I was met by John Cockcroft and Michael Oliphant, both men who had worked with my brother, as I arranged with Mr. Chadwick. They are his students. I wanted to ask them about the bit on the letter I gave you." She held out her hand and Thomas automatically handed Ernest's letter back to her. "Then," Milo enthused, "we went to an open lecture on the photoelectric effect." "What did you think about radio idea?" she continued, waving Ernest's letter. "I read that James Clerk Maxwell said the range could be improved by an increase in potential difference." "I'm sorry, Milo," Thomas admitted. "I couldn't really grasp what the letter said." But his friend shook her head. "No, on the back. Something like Clerk Maxwell hypothesized." "Yes, but Milo was beckoning him into the shop, which currently displayed an open sign facing them. Presumably, closed showed the other way. "It apostrophe s. Magnificent," Thomas said, genuinely impressed when he saw a model village. It even had little people around a square box on which Milo had marked the big house, and whose real lights represented everything Ernest had done. "I planned to use it at the discourse." It was Ernest's. "But this is what I added. Can you help me?" "With what?" "When you go back to Downton Abbey, will you put this at the very top of the gallery tower, next to the wind vane on the west side, facing the village?" She handed him a metal length, on which other spikes were sticking. At the bottom, the length of metal was attached to a gauge, which Milo made move from its zero position when she hummed by it. "I want to try something," she furthered. "A staged radio transmission. For that, I need the transmitters and receivers to be somewhere up high. The tower is an ideal spot, as is the church tower here." The vicar agreed. Thomas asked. He agreed. "I said it was something Ernest wanted to try, which is nearly true, if I had told him." Thomas drew his head to hers, and looked into her enlivened eyes. "You are a true wonder, me Lucina Ashby," he told her, then left a swift kiss on her forehead, imagining she was Ernest. "Of course I can." "Is there anything else I can do?" "Nothing for the moment," Milo told her. "So, should I agree to Mr. Chadwick's offer?" "I would say wait, Milo," Thomas said. "If he is genuine, he will wait for you. He will wait for you to get all of Ernest's work is clear in your mind, and what you will say on your brother's behalf. Then, being careful with the radio transmitter, Thomas Barrow made his way back to Downton Abbey, to his once ally and her nephew, and to the delectable Jimmy Kent. 88,888,888. So it was from the top of St. Michael and All Angels Church that Milo watched as Tom and Sybil Branson arrived for the wedding of Lady Mary and Matthew Crawley. She had taken an opportunity, and why not? The vicar had told her she could do Ernest's experiment when she liked, and Milo liked that morning. So she did not see the need to stop as she climbed through the church rafters, but Milo knew enough to be quiet. The Archbishop was speaking, saying the marriage service. Everyone knew one had to be quiet in a church service. Did Sybil know that Tom Branson was a member of the Inchiquin family, as the Crawleys traced their lineage back to the Plantagenets? The O'Briens, of which Lord Inchiquin was one, was the descendant of a much older Irish family, that of Brian Boru. She must have done, or else she would not have been allowed to marry him. It was important in Lord Grantham's family that nobility married nobility. Yet the Earl of Grantham did not look pleased when he looked at his youngest daughter and Tom Branson, Milo considered, though he was trying hard to. She waited until the last of the congregation had left the building and the candles had been extinguished by the vicar. The door closed and it was darker. Milo climbed back up to the gallery, and then further up into the rafters and into the bell chamber. Eventually, on the roof, she clung to the tower as a little gust of wind became a bigger effect on her, and she tied a rope around her waist. Mr. Ashby wasn't going to tell her off or punish her today, Milo thought, determinedly. As long as she didn't cause a fuss by having an accident, all would be well, and she would be able to prove radio waves could be transmitted further by using a receiver which could then be used to transmit the waves. Just like the relay runner. She did not see Thomas Barrow look up to the church spire, knowing it was Milo who was up there. The cars were going back to Downton Abbey with more on their mind than a person on the top of the church roof. It was on, or at least it had been when he had left. Thomas hoped his friend obtained what she wanted from the experiment, but then he remembered Milo telling him that if she didn't, a negative result was still a result. 88,888,888. It was a week later when Milo, who had set the transmitter for long-wave radio waves, came to the back door of the kitchen. As usual, there was the flurry of activity, but this time, urgency. Disbelief. Are you telling me the range has gone and the water system? We can't serve anything of the dinner now, it'll be ruined. There are cold meats, cheese, bread. They will have to have a buffet. And the lights are gone in the withdrawing room. That had Milo's attention. Electricity was her territory. There would be copper, still, in the generator room. The supply would need to go off for her to repair it. But there was no one to speak to. No one to tell she was there and could make this right for Lord Grantham. So she climbed up the back stairs, which led to the gallery and the bedrooms, then up further, to the servants' rooms. Above was a ladder which led to the top part of the roof, and out there was an outside ladder which took her to her radio transmit receiver. It was windy up there, and Milo wished she had remembered a coat, for the wind was getting through Ernest's shirt and jacket. She fought with all her strength to stay holding on. And when she got to the top, all seemed well. The long metal pole on which she had placed the large metal section was still there, and Milo made to climb down. Then, she noticed, something was not there, pulled out at the bottom. Wires exposed to the weather. The gauge had been pulled off, not removed, with a screwdriver, carefully, but torn from the transmitter. It was no wonder she was not getting any return signal. The electrical housing was missing. The signal would not return to the church receiver. Milo would have to repair it, bring another one. And, she thought, she would have to apologize for not asking permission first time round. Clearly it had been discovered and it wasn't causing harm. She was halfway down the steps between the servants' rooms and those of the family when a hand grabbed her shoulder. I knew it would be you, a voice growled by her ear. You'd mented, simple, idiotic lunatic. Milo knew the voice, and though she had long got over her childish fear of John Bates, his words were full of menace. I bet you did not ask his lordship's permission for this. Before her eyes, he thrust the gauge from the transmitter, smashed and irreparable, and Milo made a grab for it, but the man held it at arm's reach. Why are you doing this? Milo asked him, and Bates stopped shaking her shoulder. "I am merely continuing my brother's work." "How can you be?" Bates snarled, and when Milo made to duck under his arm and grab her gauge, he was ready and thrust her against the wall, letting her go as she slumped onto the floor. But Milo only felt the pain of her heart, as she realized all her work, months of it, were ruined. "You are a stupid, ignorant girl," Bates snarled, and pushed Milo down the remaining stairs. "Your father should have drowned you when you were born." "You should. Just what is going on here?" Milo looked up, as she heard Lady Grantham's voice, but did not see her ladyship. Instead, she saw an older woman, taller, more hair, more clothes, speaking with Cora's voice. "I beg your pardon, Mrs. Levinson." Behind Milo, Bates stood taller. But Martha Levinson looked at Milo, and pulled out a clean handkerchief, for there was blood at her temple. "It is her that is owed the apology, I think." Mrs. Levinson put a hand out to Milo and, despite not knowing her, knew that she was not Bates, and tentatively took it, standing, silently, beside the woman. "Milo." Behind them, a man's voice made both women turn their heads. Milo's chest filled with hope at the familiarity, and she smiled. "You know this man?" Mrs. Levinson asked Milo. "Yes." "And you know this girl?" Thomas's affrontedness at Bates was tempered with an opportunity for revenge. "I do." "This young lady is Miss Ashby, Mrs. Levinson. I am sure Lord Grantham has told you about her brother, Ernest Ashby." "Indeed." "The brilliant physicist who has developed some sort of breakthrough with atoms," Mrs. Levinson said. One eye on Bates, who was the student of Professor Rutherford, at Cambridge, and Manchester, Thomas told her, smirking at Bates. "Milo here, though she may not look it, is as brilliant as her brother, and has taken to continue her brother's work, who lost his life to us." "That man was terrorizing her," Mrs. Levinson told Thomas. "Was he now?" Thomas grinned at John Bates, a grin with no humor in it. "Reassuring to know some things don't change, Bates." "What does that mean?" "You have always gone out of your way to harass Milo, even when she was a child." "Over a small apple, once, I believe." Bates paled. "You like apples?" Mrs. Levinson said, glancing at the two men. "I can take you to the dinner we can eat it where we like. And I can tell you about a city called the Big Apple." A thump. Milo did not want to see who it was who had done what to whom, but her heart felt easier when Thomas stepped past them, nodding to Mrs. Levinson respectfully. But it was then when Milo lowered her head. There, Mrs. Levinson consoled, though Milo was not crying. Her shoulders were heaving a little and, rather than leave, Thomas paused and smiled to her. "Why don't you show Mrs. Levinson your letter?" Thomas encouraged. Then she turned to Cora's mother and added, "If I may say, Lucina has been working with her brother when he fitted the electrical lights and sockets and has continued the work, under the guidance of Dr. James Chadwick, of Manchester and Cambridge Universities." His lordship was patronizing her brother's work. "Really? How interesting." "Perhaps you could come with me, this way, and tell me about it." "You too," she told Thomas. And the American heiress took Milo to the study on the first floor, the bedroom floor, and encouraged her to sit and tell. And Milo sat and told of how electricity could be generated, and how she had learned how with Ernest when he worked at Downton, how she had continued to experiment and had sent her ideas to Chadwick, news to Thomas, who had guessed they had been writing, and how, if she could find the money for the entrance examination, she could gain an undergraduate degree when she was old enough. Mrs. Levinson looked down at the letter, and the second sheet, folded round the first, with the electrical circuit diagrams on it, her idea of a more efficient generator. "You did that yourself?" "Yes," Milo agreed. "And you are, how old?" 15. "And she is in need of a patron," Thomas concluded for Milo, as he stood apart from the two seated women, as if guarding the door. And indeed, he was keeping one eye out for Bates. "Nothing financial. Her father has enough money for that. But a reference, of sorts." "What about my son-in-law?" Martha Levinson concluded. "He was supporting your brother anyway." At her words, the confident Milo was replaced with the unnerved Milo. the one who did not know how to ask such a thing. She hung her head. Mrs. Levinson turned her head to Thomas. You seem to be her friend. Can you talk to Robert? I mean to, Mrs. Levinson, Thomas told her, and he approached Milo and put his hand on her shoulder. Milo is a little different, but her work exceeds some of even the brighter minds. Her brother's work was published, but not presented, not so long ago, and Ernest, Mr. Ashby, that is, confided to me that it was incomplete. He smiled down to Milo, as much of a sister in his heart as Ernest was his soulmate. Milo finished it. I see, yes, I see, Mrs. Levinson replied. Smile, my dear. You may yet attend where your heart desires. One step at a time. Let me speak to Robert. And, to Thomas's amazement, Mrs. Levinson walked straight out of the study, bringing him and Milo with him, and demanded an audience with Robert Crawley. May we speak to you? Robert, who did not turn immediately, for Mrs. Levinson had not been announced, turned quickly to the door. Yes, yes, of course, he replied, looking at Milo with her, and glancing to Thomas who, he noticed, had not announced his mother-in-law. First, Lord Grantham said, when Martha Levinson had relayed all she had to him, the research her support from James Chadwick, who had approached Rutherford. I did not know about your experiment, and therefore have not given permission for it. I am sorry, Milo exclaimed, looking down. I beg your forgiveness, your lordship. I thought only that as Ernest was no longer here to do it. I understand perfectly, Lord Grantham told Milo, when she had both explained the purpose of it and apologized profusely for not seeing his permission again. When the time comes, you may bring the details of your university plans to me and we may discuss it. Is that a suitable arrangement, Miss Ashby, subject to your father's approval? Beside her son-in-law, Mrs. Levinson twinkled. Yes, Lord Grantham, Milo replied, a glow in her heart, which would have rose higher, had not Bates's attack on her marred her thoughts. And you may continue with whatever research you feel you must. I only ask that if there is major disruption to be had, you come to me first. Moving furniture, taking up floorboards. Thomas can help you decide. Milo nodded, feeling happier still. Now, this business with the gauge, Robert Crawley continued. It is broken, you say? Vandalized, Thomas put in, his face, body immobile, and he seemed to hiss the word. And this damage has caused the lights to be out in the library? I don't think so, Milo told him. I don't know what has. It should only take a few minutes to ascertain. Lord Grantham smiled. Then, I am grateful to you. Perhaps, at some stage, you could teach one of the new footmen. Jimmy, I believe, is interested in technical science, for when you are not. Lord Grantham broke off and raised a hand towards Milo. What has happened to your face? One of your servants was treating her poorly, Mrs. Levinson told him, severely. A grown man, assaulting a child? She shook her head. I've never seen the like. And when he had heard the whole story, Lord Grantham's jaw fixed firmly and he walked past Thomas. Carson. The butler arrived at the door. Milo could see his form filling most of the doorway. Find Bates. Bring him to me. She was somewhere she shouldn't have been, Bates told Lord Grantham, keeping his eye fixed on his lordship. This is true, Robert Crawley admitted. So she did not ask your permission for the experiments? Bates furthered, a glint in his eye and a play around the corners of his right as he gloried at his vindication. But Lord Grantham hardened before his valet and raised his voice. That is irrelevant. You must not hit Miss Ashby, he told Bates. You must never hit her, nor anyone else, and that has to be told to him. Mrs. Levinson's voice cut through the dialogue that was going on between them and both men looked at her. A child in the wrong place in the house, and you strike her like that? My lord, Bates made to excuse himself, but the door was pushed open and past Carson rushed a woman. I am sorry, my lord, but I must speak up, came her voice. St. Anna. Thomas growled under his breath. It confused Milo but put a smirk on Thomas's face and brought a glare from Carson. Your lordship, Anna continued, in a flush, what Mr. Bates has not told you was that he followed what he thought was an intruder to the top of Downton, and when the intruder struggled made an effort to restrain her. As you restrained your wife? Thomas murmured, just loud enough for Bates to hear. He turned, and gave Thomas a scowl. "Indeed, Robert, that's as may be," Mrs. Levinson told him, coldly. But this man had in his hand a device that Miss Ashby was using for her experiment, damaged beyond repair, she tells me. Bates. He looked between Martha Levinson and Milo. "Because I found it, and did not know what it was," Bates excused himself. "So I thought to disable it before this simple child did something dangerous to the house. And, as we can see, we have had problems with the lights, the range, which is coal, is it not?" Martha Levinson was not letting anything go. "And so you know it belonged to her?" Martha Levinson pointed out. "The intruder could only have been Miss Ashby, and yet you treated her with such violence that I am sickened." Milo looked down. "Somehow, it was her fault." "It was always her fault if a fuss was made. She liked things to go right, always." "Leave, all of you," Lord Grantham told them. "Not you, Bates." He looked to Milo. "I am sorry that you were treated as such," he told her. "My mother-in-law will escort you," he added. "And may I reiterate my offer of a reference, support, if you do decide to attend university?" "Yes, Lord Grantham." Milo made sure she did not turn her head to Bates, or she may well be impolite and uncivil. He had done it deliberately, out of spite, like a child. Not even Milo had done that to people when she had known right from wrong. "Then you accept?" "Yes, Lord Grantham." "It is a privilege and an honor." "And can you repair the lights?" Milo thought for a moment, before nodding. "The generator will need to be switched off. You may need to light candles while I look. There is still copper in the generator house." "Then it will be so," Lord Grantham told her. "Please look into the electrical issue as soon as you are able." "Now," said Martha Levinson, as she took Milo by the elbow and escorted Milo from Lord Grantham's study. "Please come with me, Milo, is it?" And as they left, they heard Bates, with the odd chirrup from Anna, protest his behavior, and Milo heard words such as, "simple and retarded and irresponsible" be uttered by Bates before his lordship raised his voice and the insult stopped. "I have the copper, actually," Milo told Mrs. Levinson, pulling it from her pocket, and she turned to Cousin who, stiffly, agreed to candles being brought, taking Thomas with him and muttering about it being his fault. And Mrs. Levinson accompanied Milo to the electrical generator, witnessing her not only shut down the power to Downton, but accompanied her to the wiring housing in the hall, which led into the library. The house went dark as Mrs. Levinson greeted Thomas, who had brought a candle by which Milo could work. She had the copper and both watched as she ascertained that it was a burned-out length of wire that was at fault, and it was a matter of moments before it was repaired. "I can turn back on the electricity," Thomas told them. "Ladies, stay there." And within a few minutes he had done so, the lights in the library sparking as brightly as ever they had done. "Miss Ashby, will you join us?" Mrs. Levinson told her, as the kitchen and serving staff began to bring the cold supper. Milo did not answer, instead turned uncertain eyes to Thomas. "I am inviting you as my guest," Martha Levinson told her. "We are to eat where we wish, have quiet, informal conversation. And I would very much like to converse with you, Miss Ashby," Mrs. Levinson told her. But Milo looked forlorn. "I do believe my clothes not suitable for a dinner," she told the woman. But Mrs. Levinson threw back her head and laughed a tinkling laugh. "Nonsense," she told Milo. "One of my granddaughters will lend you something. Will you take her, Mr. Barrow, is it?" "I do not think it proper," Thomas told her. Mrs. Levinson gave him an odd look, as if she had an altogether different impression of Thomas Barrow. "Very well, can you bring someone to help? That young kitchen maid?" She nodded towards her. Daisy, Mrs. Levinson agreed, then turned to Milo again as Thomas Barrow approached Daisy and with some points and gestures, explained what she was needed for. "You are very welcome if you are ever in America," Mrs. Levinson told her and gave Milo's hand a squeeze with a firm one of her own. "Princeton, that is where my late husband attended. I still keep up with the news from there. In fact, I know a man named Henry de Wolfe Smythe, a nephew of mine, who is also interested in the energy possibilities of breaking open the atom which, Ha, always sounds to me like an egg, with a yolk and an shell which has been thrust against the edge of a cooking bowl. While Milo was considering this analogy, she watched as Thomas brought over a very nervous-looking Daisy. Mrs. Levinson bent her head to Daisy and spoke slowly to her. "You are to go the Lady Sibby's room with Miss Ashby and allow a choice from the gowns that no longer fit." Don't think I can do that," Daisy protested. "What if someone came in? I wouldn't know what to say." In the end, Mrs. Levinson accompanied Daisy and Milo, and she was given a pale blue gown to wear, and Daisy did it up for her. Not that it mattered to Milo, clothes never did, for she did not understand them apart from the obvious use of keeping one look decent. Daisy combed her hair, which was still short and curled around her ears, and she fixed a small pearl clip mounted in silver that Mrs. Levinson handed to her and told Milo she must keep. "I'll be much offended if you don't," she told her, and Milo walked with Cora's mother down the steps and into the hall of Downton, talking to her about America, and the electrical war that had taken place 2 decades before, between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Edison won the popular war, but Tesla won the intellectual war, Martha Levinson told her, and Milo was pleased not to be stared at when she entered the dining room, prepared as she was to nod to the nobility. 1 or 2 looks came her way, but nothing more, only Dowager Lady Grantham passed comment. More and more informal by the hour, she said to Martha Levinson. The American woman stood and faced Violet Crawley and replied, glancing to Milo, "Informal, yes, and most charming." And they talked, which Milo found easy, and shared with Mrs. Levinson that her father's family were in trade and her mother's family were of new money, as Cora Crawley had said when they had discovered she was of the Jameson family, and Milo told her about her cousin, Marconi, and the radio experiments, and that he was related to the O'Briens of Inchiquin, who could trace their ancestors back to Brian Boru. How fascinating! Mrs. Levinson told her, and pulled over her daughter to tell her about how Milo was related to Irish nobility, or her son-in-law to recount what Milo had told her about Marconi's experiments and their direct contribution in saving people aboard the Titanic. "We know this, of course," Lord Grantham told Milo, "but it does not age in the retelling." And then he made an apology to Milo for her treatment once again and assured her that Bates had been admonished. "Come straight to me, regardless, should anything like this happen to you again," he told Milo, and then she watched him go off to speak to a man who had made his money in soap and was a descendant of Titus Salt. When the night was over, Milo was given a room to sleep in before changing back into her old clothes, Ernest's clothes. It was Anna who saw her stepping down the back stairs on her way to the kitchen, having folded up Lady Sybil's too small blue dress. She said nothing to Milo, but pursed her already thin lips and narrowed her eyes to her, and she jerked her head from Milo disdainfully. Whether she could have thought of something to say, Milo did not know, so simply said nothing, and got to the servants' dining room. "Her ladyship has told me to tell you that you should eat breakfast here," Mr. Carson told Milo, which she did so, and once she had and thanked Mrs. Patmore, was further told she should go to the garages, for the car had been ordered to take her back home. But all the while, as she appreciated all of the care that was being given to her, Milo felt out of place and wishes that she was in the warmth of the generator room with Thomas's voice and Ernest's, quietly murmuring in the quiet of the night. "Mrs. Levinson wishes to see you before you go," Thomas told her, as Milo made unhurried footsteps towards the garage. She did not wish to see Tom Branson at all, but if the car had been ordered, she felt obliged to travel in it. Milo's heart lightened. "You made a big impression on that woman, which is not something that can be said every day." What couldn't be said every day? Milo was trying to work out what Thomas meant as they walked from the back to the front of Downton, when suddenly she noticed Martha Levinson was walking purposefully towards them. "I will be leaving Downton today," Mrs. Levinson told Milo as the car came around the corner and made a circle, so it was pointing in the direction of Downton's long driveway. The brake was pulled and Tom Branson got out, opening the car's passenger door. "I just wanted you to have this." Martha Levinson pressed an oblong of card into Milo's hand. "My calling card. You must look me up if you come to America." Milo smiled, then turned worried eyes to Branson, whose face was fixed, green eyes glassy. "Please accompany Miss Ashby home, will you, Mr. Barrow?" she added, and watched as Branson helped her into the car. Pushing past Thomas got up to the passenger seat. "Maybe it is not just you who is rising in the eyes of members of the Crawley family," Thomas told Tom Branson, and he received a barely audible huff from Branson, who executed his task of driving Milo home and vented his frustration by leaving Thomas Barrow behind in the village.